Hi everybody, welcome back. If you didn't know, Oprah just did an episode, probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago, it's been a little while now, all about adult children going no contact with their parents. And I have a lot to say. So much so, I just recorded an episode and it's so long, I'm splitting it into at least 3 parts, probably 4. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on the part 1, which is really just talking about a lot of the implications of the title of the episode and also introducing the first therapist that they have on the show. Spoiler alert, I don't think highly of him. So this episode definitely is this part of the episode, is a little more on the negative side, but the episode does get better. I introduce more about why I'm doing this video and stuff as we start into part 1. So with that, let's just go ahead and start with part 1. Hi everybody, thanks for coming back. As you can probably see, this year has been really crazy for me with a lot of unexpected things, and I keep thinking my life has settled down and back to normal, and then something else happens and I end up with breaks that I wasn't meaning to have. So I'm hopeful that this time it really is settled down and more normalized now, and I'll be back more regularly. I had to do some traveling these past few months, just related to, I mentioned in one of my earlier episodes that we moved to South America, and there was a delay in processing our visas, and we had to leave for a little while to pause our temporary visas while those were getting processed. And it was supposed to be for a couple weeks, and it turned into months. It's such a long story, and actually the experience really showed me some issues that I have that I didn't realize were as significant as they are, and I'm going to do a whole episode about it. So I don't want to go into too much detail now, but we'll be doing that soon in the future. I have a special episode I want to do right now because it's timely, just based on recent events and because we're in a series about going no contact right now. But after this, once we get done with this episode here, I'm going to be talking about maintaining no contact from our series that I started over the summer and I thought would be completely done by now. So we've talked about, making the decision on whether going no contact is the decision you want to make, or maybe low contact, or, the different options you have. We did an episode on actually going no contact, how to do that, what the options are there. I want to talk about maintaining no contact next, because going no contact, unfortunately, isn't a one-time event. It really is a practice, and we'll be talking more about that soon. But I want to pause because if you haven't heard, Oprah had this big episode on YouTube about going no contact. It was a couple of weeks ago. I kind of missed the boat on getting this out there right away, but still, I did watch the episode and I have a lot to say about it, both positive and negative. Now, if you aren't sure whether you want to watch it, I've seen some people say they're just not sure. I'm going to go over the episode pretty thoroughly with this critique. There were several parts that could be very upsetting. And depending on where you are in your journey, it might not be the best thing for you to watch. For others, it's fine. So part of my reasons for this is if you want to know what was in the episode, but you've been a little afraid to watch because you're just not sure if you're in a place in your healing where it's a good idea, this would be more of a safe space to hear about what was in that episode without having to actually listen to it. And secondly, if you did watch it and you felt like I did, and you just want to hear a response to it that resonates with you, I know I definitely wanted some validation after some things that were said in it. You're going to find that here. As far as Oprah herself, I've seen a lot of people in response to this episode sharing some strong opinions about Oprah, and they're welcome to have those opinions. I don't really have an opinion on Oprah one way or the other. I really rarely watched her show when it was a thing, and I haven't heard anything about her in many years, so I'm just not even a place to have an opinion, and that's not really what this episode is about. It's about her episode about going no contact. So I want to start by just going over the title, which was The Rising Trend of Going No Contact. And that just really rubbed me the wrong way. First of all, there is no data showing that estrangements are increasing. We don't know whether it's a rising, quote, trend. We don't know if it's increasing. It really could just be that it's being talked about more. And since people are speaking out about their estrangement more, it might seem like it's happening more when it actually isn't. You know, I grew up in the 80s, and you hear people today saying, oh, you just can't let kids run around like we did when we were kids because abduction rates are so high today. And actually, they were much, much higher child abduction rates in the 80s when we were all running around. But you didn't hear about it much. It wasn't talked about very much. It was a little, but you didn't hear about actual child abductions that occurred very often. Now we have Amber Alerts. We have, you know, just a lot of kids that go missing that end up on the national news and such. And so we hear about it much more. And that makes us falsely assume that it's happening much more, when actually rates were way higher in the 80s than they are today. And I'm just using that as an analogy or an example of showing how if we hear about things, we tend to just assume, well, it must be happening more. And we just don't know if that's the case. Social media has brought a lot of people together who are estranged, and that, you know, that happened to me. You know, it just, we've been more empowered knowing we have a community now. That's one of the reasons my channel exists, is to empower you to not be ashamed of your truth, to not be afraid, to help you make more sense of your journey, and to hear that you're not alone. And when people feel that way, they're much more likely to talk about what happened to them and why they've made the decision to go no contact. So we just don't know. Is it actually happening more, or do people just feel more empowered to speak their truth? When I first went no contact, I didn't even tell my relatives. Only a few people in my life knew for well more than a year that I was no contact with my mother. And I just didn't want to deal with the stigma, the shame that I knew I would inevitably have to deal with. But I felt very isolated and very alone. And that's how this channel got started. I made a video that was 15 minutes long, and it was totally anonymous. I didn't have my name. I didn't have my picture back then. Very, very anonymous. I had not yet been empowered. I didn't really feel like I had a strong community at the time. But I just needed to speak about what I was going through, what I had been through, and why this isolation was so damaging to me that I felt like I had to keep it a secret from society. And, you know, if you've followed my channel and seen from the beginning, I mean, I put that out there. It was very raw. I was in a really, really painful place in my life at the time, and I did not come back to it for like a year or so. I didn't even know that thousands of people had watched it, and there were all these comments on it. And, you know, over time, I have built a community for myself. I've felt more empowered, and now you see my faces on my channel, my name. I have a name. My name is Leslie. I'm not ashamed anymore, and I speak about what happened to me. And yes, I get attacked sometimes. You might be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, actually, at some of the comments I've had to delete from this channel. Less about me, but more because I want my channel to be a safe space for survivors of narcissistic parental abuse. And I just don't want someone coming and seeing some of the comments. But I feel more like I can handle it now because I know I'm not alone and I have this community. And I think a lot of people are feeling that way. And if that's all that it is, if estrangements are happening at the exact same rate as they have been for a century or whatever it's been, and people are just feeling more like I can tell people about my life and what happened to me and what's happening to me now, we should be celebrating that. But all that said, who knows, maybe it is happening more. Maybe both are happening. People are talking about it more, and people who have been too afraid to go no contact, they're hearing from people like me, like other people that have gone no contact, and they're hearing that we're okay. And some of those fears of like, what will happen to me if I do this, end up alleviated, and then they're empowered to go no contact. So maybe it's both. We don't know. But the title just really hit me the wrong way because and this is important because it's not just about the title. It actually is referred to as this epidemic and everything in the episode. So I'm hammering on this hard, but there's a reason. We don't know if estrangements are happening more. That's the bottom line. But also just calling this a trend in the first place was really upsetting. I mean, they just could have chosen better words. It just, whether intended or not, I don't know. It hints at something being trendy, like it's because it's cool, or we just see other people doing it, like it's not valid or it's not rooted in anything very serious. It's just something that people are doing now because it's the new trend. And I was watching a lot of comments on articles about this episode because I knew there'd be a lot of parents who have adult children who are no contact with them. And I was just curious what they would say. And just, comment after comment after comment was parents saying they had a great relationship with their child, and then some online influencer convinced them otherwise. And I think that's so ridiculous. For one, if someone's relationship with their child is so fragile that a total stranger on the internet can convince them that relationship is actually awful, then no, there wasn't a good, strong relationship there. It just, the lack of accountability. If your mother's a narcissist, you know all about what I'm talking about. And I actually did try to interact with some of these parents. I shared my story to the degree I felt comfortable anyway in that setting, and just shared some of the things that my mother had done to me, and also expressing, like, this wasn't about just, I was upset about something that happened when I was a little kid. It was that the abuse was still happening and wouldn't stop. And I needed it to stop. And I shared it on occasions very deeply personal, very painful events that had happened to make the point that these are not small incidents that were happening. And most of those parents were laughing at me. Somebody said, "I think you're dumb. I think you're stupid." It just the rudeness. And I am not encouraging anybody to interact in this way. It was more, I just wanted to see what would happen if I tried to share with these people some about my story. How would they react? And they reacted exactly like my mother does. They acted like it was stupid and crazy, and I don't even know my own lived experiences. That's just calling it a trend. So many were saying these are just young kids who don't know what's going on, and they're just doing this new trend. Everybody's going no contact with their parents. And I felt like a lot of this episode validated that narrative. Now, I do want to acknowledge, because I think a lot of people don't get this. Like, yes, it's true that people don't orphan themselves because of a trend. They don't do this for minor reasons. I don't believe that at all, that people would just decide to permanently go no contact with a parent for some little thing. But there are occasions where an adult child does go no contact with a parent for reasons besides abuse or ongoing mistreatment. I have a friend whose ex-husband is a narcissist, and her children, and again, they were children though, these were not adult children. Her ex-husband over time manipulated them and poisoned them against her, and they refused to see her. But I think an important difference here is to note that about a year and a half later, one of her sons texted her and said, "I miss you. Can I come home?" And she had the legal right to have her children. The court had said she actually has full custody of the kids because of some things her husband had done, but her children were old enough to choose. And so it was really up to them. So, of course, she said that he could come home. And then it was just a domino effect from there. And her children came back home. And they have a wonderful relationship. And I have a very dear friend who has a daughter who, when she was, about 19 or 20, went no contact with her it wasn't for real long. It was about 6 months. But she had started dating someone who was very controlling, and there were just a lot of problems there. And this happens, that people do alienate their significant others if they're abusive, controlling people. They will isolate people from their families, from their friends, to have that control. So I think it's important to acknowledge there really are parents. And by the way, my friend's daughter came back to her. She broke up with the boyfriend, and they have a very good, healthy relationship once again. And so I think that's the difference, is when you have it's something, it's temporary, even if it goes on for a long time, but that relationship can be restored. That's very different. But I do want to acknowledge that there are parents out there with adult children who are not talking to them, and it's because of reasons like I've said. But when an adult child makes a decision and is absolutely adamant that it is permanent, and they're not dating an abusive person, there's not a narcissist manipulating them. Nobody does that because of some online influencer. Like I said, if you have a good, strong bond with your child, some rando on TikTok is not going to come along and convince you that you have a terrible relationship with your parent, because you would miss that parent, as my friend's children did after some time. And, people like us who have been victimized by this abuse, there are deep wounds there. There are many, many, many failed efforts to fix a relationship with a person who's abusive. I so wanted and tried for decades to repair, to even bring the slightest improvement to my relationship with my mother. I wanted a mother, and it never worked. She never listened. She would mock me. She would attack me. She would, give me the silent treatment, not talk to me for a while. But it always ended. All of my efforts to improve our relationship ended with me being abused even more. And it was frustrating that was not talked about in this episode, that, we're not talking about stuff that just happened a long time ago. It was stuff that was continuing to happen, that was harming us. And the parent absolutely refused to stop. And then what other choice do you have? So yeah, calling this a trend in the first place, I just didn't like it. There's a lot of connotations to the word trend that are invalidating and minimizing, and they just really had a poor choice of words. But all that to say, on to the actual episode. They had some parents who had kids who were no contact with them. They had kids who were no contact with their parents. And when I say kids, I don't mean they were the children in the relationship. I mean, these were young adults. It really bothered me that they only included younger people in this who've gone no contact. And that's not in any way to invalidate them or their experiences. They definitely had stories there that I could relate to. It's just that it supported this narrative that so many estranged parents are using, which is that these are just young kids, they're spoiled, they want everything their way, they have no conflict resolution skills, and so they just cut off a parent because they're not mature enough. And by only having young adults there, that just seemed to affirm that narrative. I mean, I went no contact with my mother in my 40s, and that age is seen a lot. There are a lot of the people talking more about going no contact are in their 40s, their 50s, or 60s. I even talked to somebody who was in her 70s who had just cut off her mother, who was 90 years old. And I think just showing young adults, like I said, it doesn't mean that their stories aren't valid or true. But why not show a mix of ages? Because I feel like if there were older people on there too, and they were saying the same things that these younger adults were saying, that could have really countered this narrative that these are just immature young adults who need to grow up a little bit more, and that's really what this is all about. So it starts off with Oprah saying there's a new study that shows that 1/3 of Americans are no contact with a family member. And there's two things to note here, because she definitely says it as though this is proof that this is a huge problem and it's this growing trend. It's really increased. But that study doesn't give any historical context. How many Americans were no contact with a family member 60 years ago? Maybe it was a third, because it wasn't just no contact with a parent. It was any family member. That could be some, an aunt or uncle or a second cousin or a sibling. I mean, what does that even mean compared to what? Maybe in 1950, a third of Americans were no contact with someone they were related to. So I didn't really like that false representation that this is a huge problem that's out of control when we don't even know that. And then they have a few people define what no contact means. You don't text, you don't call, you don't send cards, you don't acknowledge any communication coming to you. That's what no contact means. And Oprah says there are professionals who are saying that there's been a shift and young people are going no contact at epidemic levels. So they've got these leading experts together to speak about this supposed epidemic of family estrangements. I think even calling it an epidemic, it's again just has this connotation to the word. You don't hear epidemic and think something great is happening. It's not an epidemic of joy or something, right? It just sort of inherently means that whatever is happening, it must be bad, right? It's like the implication is there's a problem here and we need to fix it. Now, of course, family estrangements are negative. Who wants to be estranged from somebody that they're related to? I don't want to have to be estranged from my mother. I wish I had a mother who didn't abuse me and that we had a good relationship. I miss that, or I wish for that deeply. That's why I tolerated so much abuse for 4 decades, because I wanted it so badly. So, I mean, it is bad, but it's making it sound like, especially in the sum total of the episode, that the problem is the adult kids are doing this too much and now we have a big problem. And that's just really a misrepresentation. I mean, what if it's actually good? Not that it's good when a family is fractured, but I mean, the fact that people are feeling empowered to walk away from abuse. How could we ever see that as a bad thing? If a person's going to be abusive and that person isn't going to stop, wouldn't it be better for the abused person to then leave and go with people who treat them well? So again, just yes, it's negative in the sense that, I mean, when is abuse positive? But maybe it's actually good that people are talking about it more. And maybe if estrangements really are happening at higher rates, that means that less people are living through lives. I have said this before. My one big regret in life is that I didn't walk away from my mother on my 18th birthday when I was legally allowed to do so. And I say to anyone that's in their early 20s, if this is happening and your parent just won't stop like my mother was, walk away now. I mean, I endured an additional 25 years of abuse. That wasn't positive for me. It drastically worsened the CPTSD I now have to deal with just by having the continued abuse. So just to have this assumption that this is a bad thing, maybe this is actually good if they're increasing, because people will have better mental health, So anyway, like I said, it's just a terrible misrepresentation of what's going on, even if there really are increased rates of estrangements. So Oprah starts off by introducing these quote experts on estrangement, and she starts off by introducing Dr. Joshua Coleman. He wrote a book called Rules of Estrangement. I acknowledge I haven't read it, but I did look this guy up. I'm going to have more to say about him later, but you will quickly find out I do not care for this guy and his followers. I spent some time engaging with them and just, oh my God, it was horrible. So he claims it's absolutely on the rise. He shows numbers of hashtags on various social media platforms. Of course, they're big numbers. But again, compared to what? There wasn't social media with hashtags in 1960. So how can we know that just because it's being talked about a lot, that it's happening way more? He says the perspective on family has changed. And that family isn't automatically the tribe now, that people are looking for their tribes, they're emphasizing their own identities and protecting their mental health. And again, like, why would that be bad? And he says the number one reason he sees when people talk about going no contact is protecting their mental health. But then he basically says that people who go no contact don't know how to work through conflict. So which is it? He'll sound neutral in some ways, and then he starts branching off into stuff that is definitely blaming adult children. And we're going to get a little bit more into his story in a little bit. Like I've said before, I have a hard time believing that somebody would choose to permanently orphan themselves, to be an orphan, to have no parent, because they just don't want to work through conflict. I think a big part of the narrative that was missing in the whole episode is how hard it is to walk away from an abusive parent. Now, not everyone experiences that, but I think that's the more common situation. I definitely didn't just decide, well, I'm going to go no contact with my mom and just moved on like this didn't even affect me. I was in shock for a while. I was very numb for weeks. I wished it didn't have to be this way. I didn't really want to go no contact with my mother. I wanted to not be abused anymore. I recognized that I could not withstand her treatment of me. And I also recognized she was never going to stop. I had tried so hard for so long. And I realized one day that if she was ever going to hear me out or stop or even try to stop, she would have by then. And I don't feel like I really had an alternative other than the complete destruction of myself. So that was really missing here. It's making it sound like those of us who chose estrangement from a parent were just sort of shrugged our shoulders like, well, I just don't talk to them anymore. And they didn't acknowledge that that is a very painful, traumatic decision to make. And people would not make a decision like that just because they don't want to deal with conflict. The path of estrangement from a parent is very difficult, and you're not going to choose it unless the alternative is even worse. So a little bit of a spoiler alert for the rest of this episode. After his initial introduction, most of the time this guy is blaming estranged children for having poor conflict resolution skills and just has so much sympathy for these parents who now must endure this terrible pain and acts like we have no pain at all and we're just defective in some way. And again, this is where I kind of warned this episode might be upsetting to you. If you wanted to listen to it, I would say just fast, and you're concerned about that, just fast forward through everything that has Dr. Coleman in it, because most of the problems were coming from him. But, you know, I do agree with him that there is a shift that's happening, that, you know, we're definitely not anywhere that society should be, but there is more acceptance of this idea of walking away from abusive family members as being more acceptable. I do think it's more acceptable now than it was even 10 years ago, but I definitely wouldn't call it like the common understanding, which is how he was referencing it, is that everybody's so happy now about people going no contact. You know, like I said, I have dealt with people being very cruel to me. I watch my channel closely because there's some pretty nasty comments that end up on here that I delete right away to protect my listeners from coming across them. You know, I just as an example, somebody came on here. I didn't even read her whole comment. It was so long and so ranting, but was saying, you know, oh, you're just all so weak. Your mothers were showing you tough love and you just couldn't take it. You're too weak to handle what she was trying to do for you. That's about as far as I got, and I just deleted it. But, you know, again, like, you see articles like this, you know, on social media, on the internet. Most of the comments, I would say more than what there used to be, would be supportive of people who are no contact, but it's still, the normal comment is they're family and you have to stay with those people because they're family. That you don't walk away from a parent. You know, people saying, well, you just didn't want the responsibility of dealing with your aging parent, so you walked away. You should, but a big one is like, well, everybody has their differences. You just have to accept people with your differences. When we're not talking about differences here, you don't go no contact with a parent over just a difference of opinion. So I think he really exaggerated society's acceptance of this. And this matters because people like us, it's like we go through a secondary trauma. Like we already have our first trauma. Actually, I would say we go through 3 traumas. We go through the first trauma, which is the abuse itself from our mothers. And then when we finally walk away to save ourselves, there's some trauma with that. I mean, it's accepting that this, for me, I just hoped for decades that this mother, not just that I wanted, but that I needed, was going to show up for me someday. That surely deep within my mother somewhere was this unconditional love we're all told mothers have for their kids. That somewhere she would finally connect with that and treat me using that. And to acknowledge that was never going to happen. That my mother was never going to be the mother that I needed. Yes, that's very traumatic. So we go through that trauma. And then there's the third trauma, which is that when we do walk away, we are met with a society that invalidates us, that gaslights us, that blames us for leaving abuse over and over and over. I was really disappointed that this second and third trauma were not addressed in this episode at all. And in fact, it was described as though it really isn't that big of a deal for the adult children. Dr. Coleman did acknowledge that there are some people who must go no contact, but he definitely made it sound like that's the exception and not the rule. He says there's an epidemic of therapists that are convincing people to go no contact with their parents instead of teaching them conflict resolution. I can only speak from my therapist standpoint, but she just listened to me. She believed me, which I needed because I'd really just never been believed. I had this mother who was so manipulative, who presented herself in a specific way to the world, but was so different to me behind closed doors. And I was all alone. I had nobody to go to. There was no one to come and rescue me because no one knew. And part of my therapist's job really was to listen and believe me. And if she hadn't done that, if she had doubted me, that would have really been traumatizing to me. But my therapist definitely didn't convince me. For one, I'd been no contact with a year before I even started seeing her, but she just supported me with where I was. She opened the door that if you ever wanted to restore contact with your mother, I would help you through that. She put it in my hands. My therapist did not convince me to stay permanently no contact with my mother at all. She just respected that that's the direction I wanted to go. And I don't think that's inappropriate. He just really put forth this narrative that people can't think for themselves, that professionals are just manipulating vulnerable people against their parents, and it was just really, really upsetting to have stories like mine reduced to something like that. And that's the end of part 1. I'm going to go ahead and put up part 2 tomorrow. We'll move further into the episode, meet the other therapists that were on the show, and just my commentary continuing. As I said, I have a lot to say about this, so I'll see you tomorrow. And please remember, to all my fellow survivors out there, you are worthy, you are valuable, and you are beautiful, whether your mom sees that or not.